Hi, good morning, everybody. So today I would like to spend a little bit of time doing this sort of short lecture, just trying to make the connection between the end of our last unit, the ancient Greek stuff, and the ancient Roman, the next unit. And there's this whole period in between that it's important because, I mean, when we talk about the basis of Western culture today, like even in Canada and in all through Europe, etc., it all kind of begins really with the Greeks. So how do we get from this Greeks from like 400 years ago, 2,500 years ago, to where we are today? And that's, I mean, it's a pretty big story. So, but I can make it think pretty straightforward. So we talk about, 2,400 years ago, and like Plato, Aristotle, etc., all these guys. Well, around the same time, we see the rise of this young general. So while the classical Greek stuff is happening, ultimately it ends and it's taken over by this guy named Alexander of Macedonia, who ultimately becomes known as Alexander the Great. And that Alexander the Great period is known as the Hellenistic period, and then even the period afterwards, because that's the period of the transition between the Greek sort of control of the area and the Roman control. It's not an easy connection, because after Alexander dies, there's probably 250 years of sort of infighting and civil war, etc., etc. But ultimately, it's taken over by Rome. The whole area is taken over by Rome. But that's not the full story. What matters really is that the Greek culture is spread by Alexander through like Persia and all the way to the borders of India, actually. The language, the sculptures, the exposure to a lot of these different ideas. And although they don't last in those areas, what happens is that's the time when Rome is rising. So as Rome is rising, they get exposed to all these Greek ideas of language, of sculpture, of music, and all that stuff. And what they do is they adopt a lot of those Greek things into this evolving Roman culture, which is why when you look at the Roman like gods and even the Roman sculptures and stuff, so much of it is Greek. It somehow feels Greek. It has different names, but the gods of Rome are the same as the gods of Greece, and so that's how. This is because of this Hellenistic period and exposure to these new ideas. All right, so that's what happens with Rome, and but the story doesn't really begin there of Rome. The story begins probably 500 years before the death of Alexander. And that's where I want to go and talk a little bit about the legendary beginnings of Rome, and how Rome was a big deal, before the Roman Empire was actually. The Roman Empire is sort of the famous part, but there's a lot of other stuff to talk about before you ever get to the empire. So Alexander to Rome, and now we go back and look at the legendary beginnings of Rome.